Welcome to Talk Treatises.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're doing something a little different, a little more rigorous.
And maybe a little more dangerous.
I think so, yeah. We are stripping away everything but the text itself. No biographies, no Wikipedia summaries, none of the centuries of academic commentary that, usually cloud our judgment.
It's the text-only challenge. Just us, the words on the page, and the arguments as they are presented.
Exactly. We're looking at the logic as it stands, or, well, as it falls on its own merits.
No cheating, no checking what some later philosopher thought about it. Just the dialogue itself.
And the text we have on the slab today is a short one, but man, is it punchy. We're looking at Plato's Ion.
It's often considered one of the minor dialogues, maybe because of its length or maybe because it's just so funny.
It is unintentionally hilarious, but the questions it raises about art and genius and, expertise, they're devastating.
Devastating is absolutely the right word. This is a dialogue that just fundamentally undermines the authority of the artist.
Right.
It asks a question we are still really uncomfortable answering today, which is, does a great artist actually know what they're talking about?
Or are they just a conduit for something else, a vessel?
Exactly.
It's the kind of question that makes you look at your favorite musician or your favorite actor completely differently.
For sure. So before we jump into the thesis, should we set the stage?
Yeah, let's do it. The dialogue is a conversation between two people. On one side, we have Socrates, the ultimate critical thinker, the man who famously claims to know nothing.
And on the other side, we have Ion.
So tell us about Ion. Who is this guy? Because he is a character.
He is. So Ion is a rhapsode. And we need to be really clear about what that means because we don't have a direct equivalent today.
Right.
He is not a poet. He doesn't write the words. He is a professional performer of poetry.
So like an actor? Is that the closest thing?
A bit more than an actor. Think of him as a mix between, say, a top-tier Shakespearean actor, a spoken word artist, and a modern rock star.
Okay, I like that.
He travels from city to city, performing the works of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey to these massive crowds.
And he's not just reciting them, right? It's not just memorization.
No, it's a full performance. He's interpreting, he's putting on a show, he dramatizes the voices, he weeps on stage, he shouts. It's a total full-body experience for him and the audience.
And the text makes it clear right from the jump is feeling himself. He has just arrived in Athens from Epidaurus.
Right, he was at the festival of Asclepius. And this is not some small open mic night. This is a major cultural event.
And he didn't just show up, he won first prize.
The top prize.
Yep.
So he's walking into this conversation literally wearing a golden crown. He's dressed in the finest embroidered clothing. He is absolutely riding high on a wave of adulation.
He enters this dialogue with an ego the size of the Acropolis.
And that's so crucial for the dynamic. You have Ion, who is used to being worshipped by crowds of like 20,000 people.
20,000. It's incredible.
And he's standing face to face with Socrates, who is, well, he's Socrates.
Barefoot, probably.
Probably barefoot, wearing the same old cloak he's had for years, and he's known for just methodically dismantling egos for fun.
It's a complete clash of cultures. The celebrity versus the critic.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to the central thesis of the work. If you had to boil it all down to one sentence, what would it be?
I think it's this. The dialogue argues that artistic genius is not a result of skill, knowledge, or mastery, what the Greeks called techne, but is actually a form of divine madness.
Divine madness.
Yeah, a kind of possession where the artist literally loses their mind to become a vessel for the gods.
So, not skill, but inspiration. Pure, irrational, divine inspiration.
That's the argument. And Socrates lays a beautiful trap to prove it.
He does. It's the classic Socratic feint. He starts the conversation with what looks like flattery.
It really does. He tells Ion, oh, I envy your profession. He says, you rhapsodes, you're so lucky. You get to dress up, you look beautiful, and you spend all your days in the company of the best poets, especially Homer.
And Ion just eats it up. He completely misses the irony, the setup.
Of course he does.
He takes it completely at face value because in his world, everyone envies him. So why wouldn't Socrates? It makes perfect sense to him.
But then Socrates adds the little kicker, the hook. He says, it must be amazing to not just learn the words by rote, but to understand the thought of the poet.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah. Because, as Socrates posits, a rhapsode has to be an interpreter of the poet's mind for the audience. And you can't interpret what you don't understand, right?
This is the first turning of the screw. Socrates is defining the job description in a way that forces Ion into a corner.
How so?
Well, if Ion is just a parrot, just repeating sounds, then he's not an artist. He's just a tape recorder. Right. So he has to agree that he understands the meaning, the deep thought behind the words.
And Ion agrees with wild enthusiasm. He says, that's the most laborious part of my art.
He claims he speaks about Homer better than anyone alive, better than Metrodorus, Stesimbrotus, Glaucon.
He just lists all the famous critics of the day and says, yeah, I'm better than all of them combined. He says he has more fine thoughts about Homer than anyone. He literally says he deserves a golden crown from the Homeridae.
The Homeridae being what, the Guild of Homeric Scholars?
Exactly. He's not just content with being a famous performer. He wants the academic street cred, too. He wants the performance awards and the scholarly accolades.
So, okay, we've established Ion's position. He claims to be an expert. He claims to possess deep knowledge. And this is where Socrates springs the trap.
It's such a subtle pivot, a simple question.
He just asks, does your skill extend to other poets? What about Hesiod or Archilochus? Or is it really just Homer?
Now, if you're Ion, you think this is a softball question. You think, I'm a specialist. Of course, I focus on the best of the best.
Well, he walks right into it.
He sure does. He says, no, just Homer. Homer's enough.
And he goes even further. He admits something that's actually really damaging to his case.
Yeah, he says that when people discuss other poets, he gets bored. He literally says he dozes off and has absolutely no ideas.
But the second someone mentions Homer, he wakes up, his soul starts to dance, and he has plenty to say.
Now, to a modern ear, that sounds like specialization, doesn't it? We'd say, oh, he's a Homer specialist.
For sure. If I go to a cardiologist, I don't get angry that he falls asleep when I start talking about, podiatry.
Right. But for Socrates, this is the fatal flaw in Ion's claim to have knowledge or art.
Let's unpack that because this is the core of the first major argument. Let's call it the argument from the whole.
Okay, the argument from the whole. So Socrates argues that art or science, techne in Greek, is a whole. What does that mean?
The Greek concept of techne isn't just a vague skill. It implies a systematic body of knowledge. It's based on general principles.
So if you understand the principles of a field,
you should be able to apply them to the entire field, not just one little corner of it.
And Socrates uses these great analogies to prove it. He starts with arithmetic.
Right. He says, imagine a group of people are talking about numbers. One person says something correct, another says something incorrect. Who can identify the good statement?
The mathematician.
And who can identify the bad statement?
The same mathematician.
Exactly. Because the rules of math don't change. You don't have an even number specialist who just, zones out when you bring up prime numbers. If you know math, you know math.
The principles apply to the whole.
And then he uses the nutrition analogy. If people are discussing which foods are healthy, the person who knows the good food also, by necessity, knows the bad food.
It's the same art medicine. You don't find a doctor who only knows about the health benefits of carrots but is completely baffled by potatoes.
Right. It would be absurd.
And finally, he brings it closer to home, to the arts. He uses painting and sculpture.
Yeah, he asks Ion directly, did you ever know a critic who could only explain the virtues of, say, Polygnotus the painter, but fell asleep and had nothing to say when you showed him a painting by anyone else?
And Ion has to admit, no, of course not. I've never seen that.
Because to critique a painting, you need to understand the principles, right? Perspective, color theory, anatomy, composition.
And those rules apply whether you're looking at a masterpiece or a beginner's work.
Precisely. If you can explain why the master's work is good, you are implicitly using rules that would also explain why the novice's work is bad.
So the logic here is just ruthless. If poetry is a techne-like painting or medicine, then it must have rules. It has standards.
And if you understand those standards, you should be able to apply them to Hesiod just as easily as you apply them to Homer.
Because they're talking about the same things, aren't they?
Socrates asks that directly. War, society, the gods, how people should behave.
And Ion admits they are. He says, yes, they talk about the same things, but Homer just does it so much better.
And Socrates just pounces on that. He says, but to know that Homer does it better, you must also understand the inferior speaker to know that he is, in fact, inferior.
You can't judge quality if you only know one data point.
It's like tasting wine. If you say, I only drink this one vintage of Bordeaux and I have no opinion on any other wine in the world because I fall asleep, well, you're not a sommelier.
Right. You're just a guy who likes that one wine.
You have a preference, not an expertise.
So this is the paradox. Ion is, by all accounts, great at what he does. He wins prizes. He makes massive crowds weep. But he fails this fundamental test of art.
He can't critique the field as a whole. He only functions on this one specific frequency. Homer.
So Socrates lands the first blow. He concludes, Ion, whatever it is you have, it is not an art, it is not a skill, it is not knowledge.
Imagine being told that to your face. You're the most famous performer in all of Greece, and this strange barefoot philosopher just tells you, you don't actually know how to do what you do. You're an idiot savant.
And Ion is just, he's confused. He seems to accept the logic. He can't find a flaw in it, but he's baffled. He asks, then what is it? Why do I wake up only for Homer? What is happening to me?
He's desperate for an explanation that saves his dignity, that doesn't make him look like a fool.
And this desperation leads us to the most famous part of the dialogue. And honestly, it's one of the most beautiful and powerful images in all of philosophy.
Section 2. My
I love this part because Socrates stops being this, annoying logic chopper for a second.
And becomes a poet himself almost.
He does. He explains that this power Ion has isn't intellectual, it's magnetic.
He uses the stone of Heraclea, what we'd call a lodestone or a magnet, as the core of his analogy. He says, think of a magnet. It doesn't just attract an iron ring to itself.
It does more.
It imparts its magnetic power to that ring, so that the first ring can then attract and hold a second ring.
And that second ring can hold a third, and so on.
Right, so you can get this long, incredible chain of iron rings, all dangling from one another, all held together by the power of that original stone.
It's a great image.
And then Socrates maps this directly onto the creative process.
Okay, so what represents what?
The magnet, the original source of all the power at the very top of the chain. That's the muse, the god.
The divine source.
Yes. The first iron ring, the one that touches the magnet directly and gets the power first, is the poet. In this case, Homer. The poet is possessed by the muse.
Okay, so the poet hangs from the god. What's next?
The next ring in the chain is the rhapsode. That's Ion. He's not touching the god directly. He's possessed by the poet.
And the final ring, the last one at the bottom.
That's the spectator, the audience member. They get the charge last, passed down through the whole chain.
Wow, so the power flows from the god, through the poet, through the actor, and finally into the audience.
It's a transmission of divine energy, not a transmission of knowledge or skill.
This is the divine madness thesis in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And Socrates argues that for this chain to work, for the power to flow, the mind, the rational intellect of each ring has to be taken away.
Pushed aside.
Pushed aside. He says the poet is a light-winged holy thing, and there's no invention in him until he is inspired and out of his senses.
Out of his senses. That is a terrifying description of an artist.
It is. Socrates is arguing that if a poet could write by rules of art, by techne, they could write about anything. They'd be versatile, but they can't.
They can only write what the god gives them.
They're just ministers of God. They are mouthpieces. The God literally takes away their mind and uses their vocal cords to speak to us.
And to prove this, he uses a really harsh example. Tynnichus the Chalcidian.
Poor Tynnichus. He becomes the historical burn victim of Plato's dialogues.
Right. Socrates basically says he was the worst poet in history. He never wrote a single other thing worth remembering. He was a complete hack.
Except for one poem? A Paideon that was apparently an absolute banger. Everyone knew it. Everyone loved it. It was perfect.
And Socrates says this proves the point. The god purposely chose the worst possible poet to sing the best possible song.
Why? Just to prove that it wasn't human skill. It had to be divine intervention. It was a sign.
The worst of poets sang the best of songs.
It's a really compelling argument for inspiration over perspiration, isn't it? If Tynnichus had skill, he would have improved over time. He would have analyzed his one-hit song and figured out how to replicate it.
But he didn't. He couldn't.
He just got struck by lightning one time, and then the lightning moved on.
And Socrates applies this same logic directly to Ion. He starts asking about Ion's emotional state during a performance. This is where we get the idea of emotional contagion.
He asks him, Ion, when you're on stage and you're reciting the really scary or tragic parts, like Odysseus leaping onto the threshold to kill the suitors, or Achilles rushing at Hector, are you sane? Are you in your right mind?
And Ion, seemingly forgetting that he's supposed to be a master of an art, just admits the truth.
He says, no, I am absolutely not. He says his eyes rain tears, his hair stands on end, his heart just throbs against his ribs.
He's living it.
He's possessed by it. Now, Socrates just points out the sheer absurdity of the scene. He says, Ion, look at yourself. You are dressed in your finest holiday clothes. You're wearing a golden crown. You are standing in front of 20,000 friendly people who are not trying to hurt you. And you are weeping and terrified. Is that the behavior of a sane man?
It creates this incredible image of the performance as a kind of shared hallucination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The poet was mad when he wrote it, the actor is mad when he performs it, and the audience gets dragged into the madness when they watch it.
It's a contagion of irrationality passed down the magnetic chain.
But then, and this is one of my favorite parts of the whole dialogue, Ion drops this little reality check that just breaks the spell for a second.
Oh, this is so good. He says, I look down from the stage and I see the audience weeping and getting emotional. And he says, I know I have to make them cry.
And Socrates asks why. And Ion says,
because if I set them crying, I shall laugh when I take their money. But if they laugh, I shall cry because I lose the money.
It's such a jarring, brutally honest moment. Mm-hmm. It completely reveals the tension in the rhapsode's whole existence.
He claims to be this possessed holy vessel, but he's got one eye on the box office at all times.
It makes you wonder, is the madness real? Or is it a performance technique? Is he a fraud? Or is he somehow able to induce this divine madness in himself for profit?
Can you be professionally mad? Can you schedule your divine possession for 8 p.m. on a Saturday, plus a matinee?
Socrates doesn't really dwell on this economic contradiction, but for the reader, it raises this massive question mark over the whole thing.
It really does. But for Socrates, the verdict is clear enough. This isn't knowledge. You don't know about the Trojan War. You are just emotionally hijacking the audience through this divine link.
So, having established that Ion is basically a magnetic ring and not a rational thinker, Socrates moves to the third section.
The final nail in the coffin.
He decides to test Ion's claim that he speaks well on everything in Homer. This is the examination expertise.
This is where the dialogue turns into a rigorous, almost legalistic cross-examination. Socrates says, okay, Ion, you claim to know Homer. And Homer talks about a lot of different things. He talks about technical skills. Can you really judge those parts better than a master of those skills?
And he comes prepared. He starts quoting specific lines from the Iliad.
He pulls up a passage about chariot racing. It's Nestor giving his son Antilochus detailed instructions on how to take the turn in a race.
And it's incredibly technical stuff. He's talking about leaning your body to the left, urging on the right-hand horse but slackening its rein, how to avoid the turning post by a hair's breadth.
It's a proper instruction manual.
So Socrates asks, who is the better judge of whether this is good advice? You, the rhapsode, or a professional charioteer?
And Ion has to admit it, the charioteer.
Check. So then Socrates brings up medicine. He quotes a passage about a potion. It's when Nestor's concubine, Hecamede, is making a drink for a wounded warrior.
Parmenian wine, grated goat cheese, and raw onion.
Which just sounds absolutely disgusting, by the way.
I do not want grated cheese in my wine, especially if I'm, bleeding out on a battlefield.
It sounds like a terrible idea. But Socrates asks the question, who knows if this is the right treatment? You, the rhapsode, or a physician?
Ion has to admit it again, the physician.
Check. Then he does it with fishing a line from the Iliad about a leaden plummet sinking like the horn of an ox. Who judges that? The fisherman.
And then prophecy, a passage from the Odyssey where the prophet Theoclymenus sees ghosts and blood on the walls. Who is the best judge of those lines?
The prophet, of course.
So Socrates is just systematically stripping away Ion's territory. He's showing that the poem is made up of all these different parts, and each part belongs to a specific expertise.
An expertise that Ion does not have.
The very idea of an art of poetry is just dissolving. The poem isn't one art, it's a collection of a dozen other arts.
Right. If the doctor owns the medical lines, and the sailor owns the sailing lines, and the prophet owns the prophecy lines, what is left for the rhapsode? What does the rhapsode actually know?
That is the killer question, and Ion starts scrambling. He is losing the argument badly, and he knows it.
He tries to pivot. He says the rhapsode knows what a man or a woman or a slave or a reeler ought to say.
Which is a clever move, right? He's retreating to the ground of, emotional intelligence or character study. He's saying, I understand human nature.
But Socrates will not let him have it. He shuts it down immediately.
He says, wait, a ruler? If the ruler is a pilot of a ship caught in a storm, does the rhapsode know what he ought to say better than the pilot?
No.
If the ruler is a doctor prescribing for a sick man, does the rhapsode know better than the doctor?
No. Socrates refuses to let character exist in a vacuum. People are always doing something, and that something requires a techne.
So Ion is completely cornered. He has one card left to play. And it is the most audacious, ridiculous, and just wonderful moment in the entire text.
He says, the rhapsode knows what a general ought to say to his soldiers.
He plants his flag on military strategy.
And Socrates asks the obvious follow-up. Do you know this because of your art of rhapsodizing, or because you also have the art of a general?
And Ion says, and you have to imagine him straightening his golden crown as he says this, he says, they are the same art.
It's unbelievable.
He claims to be the best general in all of Greece simply because he knows Homer's battle scenes really well.
It is the ultimate example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Centuries before Dunning and Kruger existed, the absolute conviction that reading about something is the same as being able to do it.
And Socrates doesn't just, refute this logically. He roasts him. This is the Socratic roast.
He just looks at this performer in his fancy clothes and says, Ion, if you are the best general in Greece, what are you doing here? Why are you traveling around singing poems for money? Why aren't you leading the armies of Athens against Sparta?
It's such a devastatingly practical objection. Athens was constantly at war or preparing for war. They were desperate for good leadership.
And Ion makes excuses. He says, well, my city, Ephesus, is under Athens' control, so we don't need generals. And you Athenians and you Spartans, you only appoint your own people.
But Socrates isn't having it. He starts listing names of foreigners that Athens has appointed as generals purely because of their merit. Apollodorus, Phanosthenes.
He says, if you were actually a great general, Athens would hire you. But they haven't, so.
The implication is just hanging there in the air. You're a fraud. You are playing dress up.
And this leads to the final confrontation. Socrates calls him Proteus.
The shape-shifting sea god from mythology.
Yes, because every time Socrates pins him down on an argument, Ion changes shape to escape. First he's a rhapsode, then he's an interpreter, now he's a general.
So Socrates says, stop shifting. I'm going to give you a choice, a final dilemma.
Option A. You are dishonest. You actually possess a real skill, a techne, but you are deliberately refusing to explain it to me. You're shifting ground constantly to avoid demonstrating it. In short, you are a liar.
Or option B. You are divine. You know nothing. You have no skill, but you are a vessel for the gods, and through their madness you speak beautiful words that you yourself don't understand.
Which do you prefer to be thought, Ion? Dishonest or divine?
It's just a brilliant, inescapable trap. Be a fraud or be a holy fool.
And Ion, looking at his two options, being called a common liar or being called a holy inspired vessel, he chooses the one that sounds better.
Of course he does. He says, inspiration is by far the nobler alternative.
And Socrates concludes, then that is what you are. You are not a technician. You are not a knower. You are possessed. And the dialogue just ends.
Just like that. It's such a perfect backhanded compliment. You're amazing, Ion, and it's because you're completely out of your mind.
Exactly. You're wonderful, provided you admit you have absolutely no idea what you're doing.
So let's zoom out. We've walked through the text. Why does this short, funny dialogue matter so much? What is its legacy?
The legacy is, it's massive. This is arguably the moment in Western philosophy where art is definitively separated from science, where aesthetics, the study of beauty and feeling, is cleaved away from episteme, which is justified true belief or knowledge.
Before this, the poet was seen as a teacher, right? Homer was like the encyclopedia of the Greeks.
Absolutely. If you wanted to know how to build a ship or drive a chariot or comport yourself in battle, you consulted the Iliad or the Odyssey. They were instruction manuals.
And Socrates just destroys that idea. He says, no, the poet creates beauty, but the poet does not convey truth or practical knowledge.
It relegates poetry to the realm of emotion, irrationality, inspiration. And this directly foreshadows what Plato will do later in the Republic,
where he famously kicks the poets out of his ideal city entirely.
Exactly. Here in Ion, he treats them as holy but idiotic. In the Republic, they become dangerous because they manipulate the emotions of the citizens without any grounding in knowledge or truth.
It also gives us the definition of genius that we are still wrestling with today, this idea of the tortured artist, the idea that creativity comes from someplace beyond the rational mind.
The Romantic era in the 19th century absolutely love this idea, the notion that you have to lose yourself to find the art, that the artist is a light-winged holy thing.
It's a great defense mechanism for an artist, isn't it? It validates the idea that you don't need to explain how you did it.
The muse took me to shield against criticism, really. Don't analyze my work with your cold logic. I didn't even write it. The universe wrote it through me.
And it sets up this permanent tension between the critic, represented by Socrates, and the artist, Ion. The critic wants to dissect, to categorize, to find the rules.
And the artist just wants to perform and feel the magic. They're speaking two completely different languages.
And, Ion is the prototype for every celebrity who thinks their fame in one specific area gives them authority in every other area.
Oh, 100%. The actor who starts giving out medical advice, that's Ion. The pop star who thinks they have the solution to geopolitical conflicts, that's Ion.
It's the confusion of the performance of competence with actual competence.
Yes. Ion performs the role of a general so well on stage that he starts to believe he is a general. And Socrates is that annoying voice of reality in the background saying, no, you're just very, very good at pretending.
Which is a perfect segue into our thought experiment segment.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay. As always, a quick disclaimer. The following thought experiments are for entertainment and educational purposes only. They are outlandish, but they are designed to be plausible extensions of the philosophical logic we just found in the text.
We're going to push Socrates' logic to its breaking point.
Thought experiment number 1. The universal algorithm, or as I like to call it, the infinite rhapsode.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Set it up.
So, in the text, Socrates' big argument is that to have the art of poetry, you have to know the whole. You can't just know Homer. You need to know Hesiod, Archilochus, the good poets and the bad poets.
Right. Comparative data is required for true expertise. You can't recognize good if you have no concept of bad.
So imagine we build 2 artificial intelligences. AI number 1, let's call him Cyber Ion, is trained exclusively on the complete works of William Shakespeare. Every play, every sonnet, every quarto, but nothing else. No other authors, no other English text from any other source.
Okay, so it's a pure Shakespeare specialist, a closed data loop.
Exactly. AI number 2, we'll call him Socrates GPT, is trained on the entire internet, everything. Shakespeare, yes, but also terrible teenage fan fiction, angry Reddit comments, car repair manuals, bad poetry from open mic nights, great poetry, everything.
The whole. The good, the bad, and the extremely ugly.
Right. Now, we ask both of these AIs to write a new Shakespearean sonnet. Cyber Ion, who has only ever seen near perfection, spits out something that is statistically and stylistically flawless. It's perfect in meter, vocabulary, rhyme, indistinguishable from the real thing.
It mimics the pattern perfectly because that's the only pattern it knows.
Right. And Socrates GPT also writes one. But here's the Socratic question. According to the logic of Plato's Ion, which of these 2 AIs actually possesses the art of poetry?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
If we follow Socrates' logic strictly, Cyber Ion, the one that produces the perfect output, does not possess the art because it cannot distinguish Shakespeare from non-Shakespeare. It has no concept of bad or different. It only knows its own positive data set. It's operating by rote, or to use the dialogue's term, it is possessed by its data set.
It's a magnetic ring. It's Ion. It would fall asleep if you showed it a Reddit comment because it wouldn't know what to do with it.
But Socrates GPT, it knows why Shakespeare is good precisely because it has seen the infinite alternatives. It has the context of failure. It understands mediocrity.
So the implication is that true creativity requires a comprehensive database of garbage.
Yes. To be a genius, you have to know what mediocrity looks like. If you've only ever known excellence, you aren't an artist. You're just a very sophisticated copier.
That really challenges our idea of the savant genius, the person who is just singularly focused on one thing. Socrates would say that's just a parlor trick. True intellect, true techne is always comparative.
That's a heavy thought for how we think about AI development, actually. Does an AI need to understand bad art to truly be able to create good art?
Socrates would say yes, absolutely. If you can't tell me why a child's drawing is not a masterpiece, you can't really tell me why the Mona Lisa is.
Okay, I like that one. What's number 2?
Thought experiment number 2, the surgeon-actor paradox.
This one touches on that competence versus performance theme we were just talking about.
Right. So Ion claims that by reciting Homer's lines about medicine, he knows what a doctor ought to say. Socrates, of course, proves that only a real doctor can judge those lines.
So let's modernize it.
Imagine a method actor, the best in the world. He's cast in a hyper-realistic medical drama, something like House or Grey's Anatomy, and he plays a brilliant, one-renowned heart surgeon. And he does this for 20 seasons.
20 seasons. That's a huge chunk of a career. That's a lifetime of playing a doctor.
He goes all in. He memorizes every medical term. He learns the exact hand movements for every procedure. He spends thousands of hours in simulated operating rooms. He knows exactly what a surgeon says to a nurse, to a patient, to a rival. He has perfected the script of surgery.
He is the ultimate rhapsode of surgery. He looks the part, he sounds the part, he moves the part.
So now you're on a transatlantic flight. Mid-flight, the pilot has a massive heart attack. An announcement goes out. Is there a doctor on board? There are no doctors. But this actor is there.
Oh, no.
He stands up and says, I can help. I know what a surgeon ought to say. I know how a surgeon ought to hold the scalpel. I've done this 1,000 times. I can do this.
The Socratic question is, do you let him cut?
Ion would say yes. Ion would argue, I know the art of the general because I have mastered the Homeric script of war. This actor argues, I know the art of surgery because I have mastered the television script of surgery.
But Socrates would say that this is the perfect and most dangerous example of the rhapsode's folly. The simulation of competence is completely distinct from the techne, the actual causal understanding of why you cut here and not there.
The actor knows the what and the how, but he has zero grasp of the why. He's just a ring in the chain.
But here's the twist that makes it so relevant. In our modern world, where so much information is accessible, YouTube tutorials, WebMD, podcasts like this one, we are creating a generation of ions.
That is a terrifying thought.
Think about it. We consume the script of expertise all day long. We listen to a 1-hour podcast about epidemiology, and suddenly we think we know what a CDC director ought to say.
We watch a 3-part documentary on the criminal justice system, and now we think we know what a lawyer or a judge ought to say.
We are mistaking our familiarity with the vocabulary of a field for a mastery of its underlying causal mechanisms.
Exactly. We're all walking around wearing little golden crowns, standing on a mental stage, weeping real tears of conviction, absolutely convinced that we are generals, but we've never actually held a sword.
That is the danger of the rhapsode. The rhapsode's job is to bridge the gap between the expert and the ignorant. But in doing so, he creates the dangerous illusion that the gap doesn't really exist. He makes true expertise look easy.
And that's why Socrates was so annoying and so necessary. He was the guy constantly pointing at the gap. He was the guy saying, no, you don't know what you think you know.
And well, that's why they eventually executed him. People really don't like being told they're just magnetic rings.
Let's hope we don't get executed for this deep dive.
We'll just claim divine madness. It worked for Ion.
We didn't know what we were saying, officer. The muse took us. We were just the rings.
Works every time.
So, as we wrap up, here is the final provocative thought to chew on as you go about your week. If Socrates is right, if the artist, the musician, the writer, the painter, the filmmaker is truly out of their mind when they create something of real transcendent beauty, can we ever hold them responsible for their work?
If the art they create is dangerous or immoral or harmful, do you blame the ring or do you blame the magnet?
Something to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this special Talk Treatises edition of The Deep Dive.
It was a pleasure.
The link to the full text of Plato's Ion is in the bio. It's short, it's funny, and it might just ruin your confidence in celebrity experts forever.
See you next time.
Stay curious.